Okay, here we go. As we're going through the whole Bible and trying to do it carefully and to get the details while at the same time we're trying to move ahead and get the overall picture. So we are now in the book of Ezekiel. I give you the whole history of the Bible again, because by the end of the year, we're going to know the Bible well, at least the construction of it and how all of this stuff fits together. First 5 books of the Bible, the law of Moses, the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And then after that, what comes after that is the 12 books of Old Testament history. And we begin with them going into the land and occupying the land and then messing up 40-year cycles of messing up in the book of Judges. And then we have a new introduction to what's going on, because they had for many, many years, we're talking centuries here, they had God as their king. And then they ask for a human king. It's what happens in 1st and 2nd Samuel. They get a human king. And that begins the period of the kings ruling Israel and the prophets trying to direct Israel and trying to direct them through the word that the Lord gives to the nation to get back to God. Well, we have the history, and the history is a history where it's going downward. And what happens is there's a civil war, there's the northern kingdom, and there's a southern kingdom. This is so critical to understanding the Old Testament, that there was a civil war. The northern kingdom was called Israel, the southern kingdom was called Judah. And so the northern kingdom, which didn't want anything to do with the temple, simply they didn't want anything to do with the temple because they were afraid that people would come from the north and go to the temple and be all sentimental again and want to be part of the southern kingdom. So they created their own worship, and they created their own altars, and they worshiped idols, and they fall apart. The whole nation falls apart. Assyria comes and invades them, and it's the end of the northern kingdom. Well, the southern kingdom does much better. That's what 1st and 2nd Chronicles is about. Their kings are better, but their kings get progressively worse in going down. And there's little revivals here and there where they get better and where they do better, but they ultimately also just sort of turn away from God and worship in the high places and worship the idols, and they are exiled. And they are exiled into Babylon. And some very critical people get exiled into Babylon with them. Now, we looked at the book of Jeremiah. So let's just go back. So the history books, and then we did the poetry books, the poetry books being Job and the Psalms and the Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and the Song of Solomon. We did the poetry books. And then we got into the prophets, and we looked at the prophet Isaiah, who he was the messianic prophet. Talked more about the Messiah coming and just about anybody. And Matthew quotes him a lot, and Jesus quotes him a lot. We did Jeremiah, who Jeremiah was always saying, we're going to be exiled into Babylon, prepare yourself. And so he sees the fall of Jerusalem. He sees the fall of the southern kingdom. He's known as the weeping prophet. He's treated terribly. They do all kinds of awful stuff to the guy. And then he writes the book of Lamentations because he sees the city fall and he laments it. And that's all the lamenting of watching the city fall. So in watching the city fall, in the middle of it, though, he says, the blessings of the Lord are new every morning, and God is always faithful. And so even in the midst of all of this lament and all of this crying out and all of this disaster, the Lord is good. So they get exiled, and they go into Babylon. And Jeremiah had said, we looked at these passages, Jeremiah 25, Jeremiah 29, where Jeremiah told them that they were going to be in exile, bondage, for 70 years, and that they'd come back. That the judgment of God and the probation of God is that what would it end? Probation. They're on exile. They're on house arrest. However you might want to look at it. They're going to come back. They're going to come back. And that was the promise of Jeremiah, and it happened exactly that way. So when we get into some of the other books, we'll see that it happened exactly that way. And we already looked at some of those books. It's unfortunate because of the structure of the English Bible, that the story of them coming back, we already looked at it in the book of Nehemiah and then in the book of Ezra. And then you saw Esther there also, sort of in that period with the Persian kingdom. But they will come back. and they'll trickle back, and it will be a rough rebuild, and it will be hard to rebuild the temple, and the temple won't be built to anything like it was before, and the walls of the city are all falling down. It's just a mess. They were invaded by the Babylonians. The Babylonians came and destroyed just about everything, and they will go back. But we are in the book of Ezekiel, and Ezekiel and Daniel are both exile prophets, which means that they were in Babylon. And they're in Babylon prophesying and preaching, and they're encouraging the people. And so Ezekiel, it seems like Ezekiel was about 25 years old when he was exiled into Babylon. Daniel also was a young man when he was exiled into Babylon. And so it also seems that Ezekiel and his wife lived on the river there and prophesied to Israel. And he had two sort of forms of prophecy. Keep in mind, he's exiled. He's there in exile. And he's doing two things. He's proclaiming God's judgment on Judah and then on the nations. But he's also encouraging the Jewish captives with prophecies of the future glory of God's kingdom and affirming God's sovereignty over that. And so he prophesies judgment for Judah and the other nations all the way up to the fall of Jerusalem, right? All the way up to the fall. And then after that, his judgments also to the nations, but then he is prophesying the hope that is to come, the restoration that is to come. And in chapter 1 of Ezekiel, that's where you get his call. Kind of interesting, in Jeremiah, we got the same thing, sort of the call of Jeremiah early on in chapter 1. And here's what it says, starting Ezekiel chapter 1. In the 30th year, in the 4th month of the 5th day, while I was among the exiles at Kebur River, the heavens were opened and I saw visions of God. So there he is as an exile, seeing these visions of God. On the 5th day of the 5th of the month, gives you the exact time, the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim, the word of the Lord came to Ezekiel, the priest, because he's a priest, the son of Buzi, by the Kebur River in the land of the Babylonians. There the hand of the Lord was with him. I looked and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning surrounded by brilliant lights. These will be like themes in Ezekiel, a lot of this kind of stuff. And he looks in verse 16, and this is Ezekiel sees this wheel in the middle of a wheel. I looked and I saw these living creatures. Let's start in verse 10. We'll just keep reading verse 4. So I looked and I saw the windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightnings, thunder surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal. So in the center is glowing metal, fire. And the fire that looked like four living creatures, looked like four living creatures. In appearance, their form was human, but each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. Their legs were straight, their feet were like that of a calf, gleamed with burnished bronze, and under their wings were 4 sides. They had human hands. Very, very unusual. And so he gets these visions and these unusual visions, and he gets this call from God, and he gets this commission from God, and the commission is that he's going to be prophesying, right? And he has these messages, if we were to go through it, he gets these messages of judgment, chapters 4 all the way to 32. His call is in chapter 3. Well, let's look at his call, chapter 2. Here's his call, chapter 2. He said to me, Son of man, stand on your feet and speak. And as he spoke, the Spirit came into me, raised me to my feet, and I heard him speaking to me. And he said, Son of man, I'm sending you to the Israelites, a rebellious nation that's rebelled against me, and their ancestors have been in revolt against me to this very day. The people to whom I'm sending you are obstinate, they're stubborn. So say to them, here's what the sovereign Lord says, and whether they listen or fail to listen, because they're rebellious people, they will know that a prophet has been among them. And you, son of man, do not be afraid of them or their words. Don't be afraid, though the briars or the thorns are all around you and you live among the scorpions, don't be afraid of what they say, or don't be terrified by them. Though they're a rebellious people, you must speak my words to them. Whether they listen or fail to listen, they're rebellious. But you, son of man, listen to what I say. Don't rebel like the rebellious people. Open your mouth and eat what I give you. And then I looked, and I saw a hand stretched. It was a scroll, and he unrolled it before me. And on both sides were written the words of lament and a mourning and woe. And he said, Son of man, eat what's before you. Eat this scroll, and then go speak to the people. So I opened my mouth, and he gave me the scroll. So he goes out, and his task, it says that he's a watchman. He's supposed to be watching for Israel, and he'll be speaking during this exile. So that's about as far as we can go with it right now. But we're going to look at his prophecy and a few of his amazing prophecies. The book of Ezekiel, exile prophet Ezekiel, introduction to the book of Ezekiel. Hey, love you guys. Let's keep plugging along. We're going to get this. It's going to be great.